All right, let's dive right into this explainer and crack the case of what is arguably the most fascinating and heavily debated architectural blueprint in all of ancient history. We're looking at the final 9 chapters of the Book of Ezekiel, which presents us with this just staggering vision of sacred architecture. We are talking about a highly detailed, measured sanctuary, a fully restored sacrificial system, a literal life-giving river, and a totally reapportioned land. But here's the thing. For centuries, scholars, readers, and theologians have been locked in this massive debate over what exactly this blueprint is actually supposed to be.
Now, I want you to think about this for a second, because it forces us to question centuries of assumptions about this massive construction project mapped out by Ezekiel. You see, the modern era has largely treated these chapters like a literal contractor's drawing. But what if we've been reading it all wrong this whole time? What if a flat, literal reading actually collapses under the weight of the text's own specific features?
So to really get this, we gotta start with the prevailing theory out there, which reads these chapters as a literal, physical blueprint for a future third temple to be built out of actual masonry. This perspective argues that either the returning exiles were supposed to build this, or a future generation will construct it over in Jerusalem, complete with a reinstituted system of animal sacrifices. But, as our source material reveals, taking this hyper-literal approach creates some massive and frankly insurmountable problems.
Let's start with Section 1, the architectural mystery examining the blueprints of 573 BC.
Picture this. To really grasp what's happening, we need to understand exactly where Ezekiel is standing, both physically and historically. Ezekiel had been stuck in exile in Babylon for exactly 25 years. It was the 14th year after the absolute devastating fall of Jerusalem. And in a vision, he's transported to this very high mountain, where a bronze-like man with a measuring reed gives him the dimensions for this staggering sanctuary. Ezekiel paces out every single gate, every court, chamber, and threshold. I mean, the level of detail is obsessive. It practically screams construction project, right?
Well, maybe not. Let's look at Section 2, cracks in the foundation, where the blueprint fails. Here's the crucial point. If you actually handed these literal specs to a builder today, they wouldn't be able to finish the job. Why? Because Israel's most sacred furnishings, the most famous artifacts, are entirely missing from the text. Think about it. That's literally like handing a contractor a blueprint for a brand new kitchen, but completely leaving out the stove and the sink. For a vision so totally obsessed with exact measurements, there is zero mention of the Ark of the Covenant, there's no menorah, there's no veil. If this were a literal, buildable draft, these omissions would be glaring, fired-on-the-spot errors. But our source argues that these gaps are actually deliberate theological signals. It's not a blueprint for a general contractor.
And that brings us to a really massive theological contradiction. Literalists will often claim that the prince in this vision is the Messiah. But the text explicitly says this prince, the Nasi, must provide a bull for a sin offering for himself and the people. He provides for his own atonement. A figure who offers a sin offering on his own behalf is, by definition, a sinner. So this completely rules out the sinless Messiah, leaving the literalist in a really tough spot. Either the Messiah sins, which is impossible, or you have an ordinary sinful mortal presiding over the ultimate, perfect, end-of-times temple. Neither of those options works.
Then we have the issue of sacrifices. Reinstating literal sacrifices creates a huge problem, because it either completely undoes the central claim of the New Testament book of Hebrews, or it reduces the temple to an empty, purposeless memorial theater. Hebrews is crystal clear on this. Christ offered one sacrifice for sins for all time, so bringing back real, efficacious animal sacrifices is basically a frontal assault on that message. It's declaring the cross insufficient. Now, some folks try to escape this by saying, well, these future sacrifices are merely memorials, pointing backward like the Lord's Supper. But if they're just memorials, they aren't real sacrifices. They're theater. And honestly, why would we need a massive functioning temple complex just to commemorate what the proclaimed word already does?
And if the theology wasn't enough, just look at the geography. Ezekiel's reapportionment of the land uses these impossible horizontal bands that completely ignore actual real-world topography. Mountains, valleys, rivers, you name it. The text divides the territory into perfectly straight east-to-west strips, and it places a renamed Jerusalem, Yahweh Shammah, meaning the Lord is there, mathematically dead center among the tribes. Historically, remember, 11 tribes were to the north and 1 to the south. So this total rearrangement tells us right away, this isn't a cartographic survey, it's a conceptual map.
Which brings us to Section 3, the unbuildable blueprint, decoding the anomalies.
You see, Ezekiel uses this very specific Hebrew phrasing to describe the altar as the tabur, the navel or center of the world. This marks a massive shift from masonry into profound cosmic symbolism. In ancient thought, the tabur was the very center of reality itself. We actually see this exact kind of cosmic thinking with Solomon's temple too, where the massive bronze sea basin represented the cosmos itself. Ezekiel is painting a portrait of reality structure here, not handing us a CAD drawing.
To actually solve this mystery, we need to look through the lens of the divine council worldview. In ancient Israelite theology, the temple isn't just a building, it's the cosmic mountain. It's the elevated axis where the seen and unseen realms overlap. Eden was the very first one. Think about it, a lush garden on a height where God walked with his image bearers. The tabernacle and Solomon's temple were really just architectural re-embodiments of that Edenic mountain garden. And Ezekiel's vision is totally, completely saturated with this specific grammar.
And just notice how the text literally accelerates here. The water trickling from the sanctuary grows ankle-deep, then knee-deep, then waist-deep, until it becomes this rushing, uncrossable flood that actually heals the Dead Sea. No literalist attempts to take this river literally because it would be physically absurd. It heals the salt sea, teems with fish, grows trees that bear fruit every single month. Guys, this is unmistakably the River of Eden. And here is the major interpretive key from our source. If the river is a symbolic portrait of ultimate eternal life flowing from God, then the temple it flows from must also be a portrait of God's presence, not a literal building made of stone.
Let's look at Section 4, the Cosmic Mountain, Sacred Space Redefined.
This entire vision is essentially acting as what you could call a built jubilee. It's the spatial and architectural realization of the Levitical year of release, homecoming, and profound restoration. Back in Leviticus 25, the Jubilee year was this amazing time when debts were wiped clean and land was returned to its original family. Ezekiel's vision takes that beautiful concept and turns it into architecture. The idealized inheritance, the reordering of the tribes around the center. It's the structural, built form of the ultimate release and homecoming.
Because at the absolute heart of all this, it's not about the dimensions of the walls. It's about the eschatological return of God's presence to dwell among his people forever. Back in chapter 10, Ezekiel watched, devastated, as the glory of Yahweh abandoned the doomed first temple. The great theological crisis of the exile wasn't just losing a building. It was the terrifying question, will the presence ever return? Chapter 43 answers that with a resounding yes. The glory comes back through the eastern gate. The presence is the whole point of the vision.
Leading us to our final act, Section 5, the ultimate fulfillment, from stone to spirit.
So how does the New Testament handle this? Well, it systematically shifts all this temple language entirely away from any physical structure, starting with Jesus himself. Standing right there in the precincts of the actual physical temple, Jesus boldly points to his own incarnate body as the locus of God's dwelling. Remember that departed glory from Ezekiel? It never visibly returned to the second stone temple. But according to the Gospel of John, the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. The glory returned, but not to a stone building. It returned to a human body.
And the apostles do the exact same thing. They use massive amounts of architectural language, cornerstones, foundations, living stones, but they are entirely talking about a people. Believers themselves, united to Christ, have become the living, breathing temple. The Spirit indwells the church. So to demand a future, literal stone temple means rolling redemptive history completely in reverse. I mean, why go back to purifying a patch of dirt so a people can stand near sacred space when the people themselves have actually become the sacred space?
If we trace this whole canonical trajectory from the beginning, we see the concept of sacred space expanding in this amazing way. It goes from a garden, to a tent, to a stone building, to a person, to a global people, and finally to the entire renewed cosmos. It's an ever-expanding reality of God dwelling with humanity. And the final piece of the puzzle? It's right there at the very end, in Revelation, the breathtaking consummation where the new creation is described as a perfect cube. Now that is the exact shape of the inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, meaning the house is no longer needed. The seer in Revelation specifically notes that there is no temple in the New Jerusalem. Why? Because the city itself is shaped like the most holy place. The presence that the temple was built to house has now spilled out and filled absolutely everything. The building has done its work.
So,
Pulling it all together, Ezekiel wasn't giving us some flawed, unbuildable construction project. He was giving us the ultimate eschatological map of God's presence flooding all of reality. His contemporaries couldn't fully grasp it yet, but he was using their ancient language of cosmic mountains and Edenic rivers to paint this absolute masterpiece of restoration. The hope of the exiles was never ultimately about masonry. It was about a person, and through that person, a people, and through that people, a world made entirely new.
I'll leave you with this provocative thought to ponder as you look at the world around you today. If the whole world is meant to be a temple, how are you treating sacred space today? When we understand that these blueprints were always pointing to a reality that transcends stone, it completely changes how we see ourselves, our communities, and the very ground we walk on. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring the deeper structures of what you read.